So today we're talking about the five levels of leadership, and it's the first phase of the three phases of movement. So phase one is multiplication, and these five levels of leadership apply to that first phase. There are other kinds of leadership that we see, and they will more appropriately apply to these other two phases, which would be the long-term discipleship pastoral education phase, where we're teaching people from the harvest, the leaders from the harvest that are more pastor teachers, to really care for the flock. And then the third phase is the doctrinal development phase, and this is more theological training. And this is where we want the churches and association of churches to line out their doctrine and do that from the scriptures rather than handing them a denominational manual. So, but today what we're going to briefly talk about is the multiplication phase and the five levels of leadership in that phase. So, one of you guys want to talk about the five levels and what they mean, and I'll just use my mouse and point it out.
Yeah, so the five levels of leadership are progress and movement of somebody. It's not they're not descriptors of somebody's permanent place, but it's a descriptor of what someone's doing, and what kind of leadership is needed in as movement progresses. So level one is a faithful sower. This is somebody who's sharing the gospel abundantly among the lost, and fruitfully. Level two is a church planter, somebody who's starting discipleship and gathering new believers into a community of faith called church. Level three is that person is starting to multiply churches and is starting to be able to facilitate some sort of organization or structure as churches multiply and leaders other than himself are planting more. Level four is a movement trainer. So this is somebody who's training church planters independently to kind of multiply churches. And level five is somebody who can enter into different fields and different movements and facilitate, strategize, help different movement leaders and different church multipliers advance the gospel and the movement into new places.
Good. And Jonathan, you alluded to this. So is this a ranking system that people should strive to achieve?
No, I think we're supposed to strive for movement, and then obviously we want God to use us in those movements. It's perfectly fine to want God to use us in certain ways, but this is our role and what is needed in what God is doing, not what we have achieved.
Yeah, I agree. There's two dangers in this thing. One, we look at this and we say, I got to be an L5 leader, and try to achieve that rank in the movement. It's really based on how God has gifted you and what he's using you to do. The other extreme on that is to have this knee-jerk reaction to some kind of structure, well, I don't like structure, so this is not going to be useful to me. So anyways, we take it for what it's worth, and I like what you said, Jonathan. It's where the movement is at. It's like a measuring stick for where is the movement. and how is God using people within that movement. All right. Tony, what are some character traits that you see that people need to be developing as they are in one level of leadership or another?
Yeah, so I think the faithful sower, for example, is getting out, weekly, if not daily, and just consistently sharing the gospel with people. And then, I mean, as you've mentioned many times, Chuck, I mean, the results that you see of people being saved is often directly related to how often you're sharing the gospel. Um, God is working in that, but it's a bit of a numbers game as well. If we never share the gospel with anybody, then we're very unlikely to see anyone get saved.
Right.
With the church planter, um, now they're stepping sort of into more of an elder role within people's lives. So they're going to need to be portraying some of the character traits that we start to see in Timothy and Titus, because people are going to start to look up to them. They're going to be leading church, and they're going to be training others to eventually lead church as well. So they're going to have to be the type of person that people are willing to follow, and they're going to hopefully do that based on their relationship with God and the character traits that they see in this individual. With the level 3, when you're starting to multiply churches, now you're going to need to have some organizational ability as well to the character traits, because you're going to have multiple churches meeting in multiple places, and you're going to be able to you need to be able to keep up with each of those leaders that you're maintaining, or that God is using you to develop, because now you need to not only have the character traits yourself, but you need to know how to train and disciple someone, have those character traits also. The God can use His word and that sort of thing. For the movement trainer in level 4, now you need to be able to actually look from the outside and see where people are, and what they need in like a shorter period of time. You're not going to be meeting with them as regularly. So when you're coming in for a checkup, you kind of need to know how to diagnose that very quickly, so that you're not spending a lot of time just trying to catch up on where they are. You kind of need to track that from away, and then come in and see what God has been saying for them to be able to move that forward. And then for the strategy coordinator, now they need to be able to do that like on a more massive scale, and be able to pick up the stockages for multiple. Now you're looking at cities and you're saying, which people group are we missing, or which geographical location are we missing, and how do we get people to go in there, not simply by telling them to go in there, but like how is God leading them, and who's He calling to this particular area. So the strategy coordinator obviously needs to have a great character as well, biblical knowledge, and then be able to pick out those stockages and quickly discern where the gaps are.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, one of the character traits, obviously, we see all the way through this is humility, but the humility increases the further along you move down that continuum, because by the time you get to L4, L5, you don't own the ministry. It's not yours. And you really, I like what Jeff Sundell says, you need to enjoy the successes of ministry vicariously. And so you're not leading all these people to Christ. You're not leading all these churches. You don't have this huge network of churches. You're simply throwing gas on the fire, and then you celebrate other people's successes. And I made this comment in Japan that humility is a foundational character trait for multiplication, because you're always looking to help your leaders become better than you are and celebrate their success. So that's probably one of the hardest things about this. For us doers, we like to, be the ones seeing the success in our camp versus helping somebody else out. Good. What as people are looking at these levels and trying to figure out what their role is, what advice would you guys give to people that are maybe seeing this for the first time, or maybe now that they've been practicing movement principles to see the kingdom grow and Jesus' name magnified? What advice would you give folks that are looking at this and trying to figure out how does this fit in my ministry?
This is a tool that helps us look at what is God is doing and how we need to equip leadership. And so we can look at this all day, but it's just descriptive. It's not a target per se. It's descriptive, and what you need to do is be faithful with whatever God is doing in your context. And so if you're faithful with what God has given you, you are there's nothing more that we can ask for.
Good.
So
Good.
Yeah, you already mentioned it as well, Chuck, but just to reiterate that you're not attempting to, like, and it says level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's more like a lateral, like Jonathan just said, descriptor. So, if God has really gifted you in seed sowing, that's not to say that you shouldn't work on your discipleship, but you certainly you shouldn't be looking at other people and thinking like, I want to be more like them, or I want to, I wish that God had gifted me the way that He's gifted them, because God needs each of them, or each of us, to excel in the gifts that He's given us, in order for the movement to move forward the way that He intends. And the other thing that Steve Smith said to me one time at a training was that God is not going to entrust a movement to an individual who doesn't have the character to maintain that movement for God's glory instead of for their own. If it's going to cause us detriment in our own character, then God's not going to give it to us. So you were saying that humility is in all 5 of those levels, and that it increases as you go. And I would also just add that that's something that we should be constantly working on in our own lives, is seeing where God has us and really learning to be content in that, so that God can use us where we are, and we can allow Him to work through us to accomplish whatever it is that He's looking for in His kingdom.
Good. Yeah, the advice I'd give is for leaders that are developing other leaders, don't use this as a positional leadership assignment. Like, okay, you're going to be my L4 leader and you're going to be my L3 leader. Like both Tony and Jonathan pointed out, this is descriptive. In other words, this is what has happened in a person's life. We're not appointing somebody as an L whatever leader. That's, in my opinion, very dangerous, because you're putting people in leadership over others where there's no relational connection. When people grow into this leadership level, the reason they've grown into that leadership level is because of the relationships that they've nurtured and developed through discipleship. And so positional leadership has its place, but I'd rather go relational every time. That's my opinion. The other thing too is that sometimes God kind of parachutes you in at a level and you don't feel competent, and so therefore you don't you're not confident in that level. But God's giving you this flock of people that are looking to you for that level of leadership. And it's pretty scary, actually, especially if we've got that humility going on. So if that's happened to you, you kind of parachuted in at a higher level of leadership. Don't panic. That's where God has you. But just stay humble, have integrity about where you're at, but begin to backfill the skills that are necessary for you to be an effective leader at that level. For instance, I'm not the greatest evangelist in the world. I do evangelism. I do occasionally lead people to Christ, but I want to make sure I'm getting better at sharing the gospel. So I'm backfilling those skills. All right. You guys are good. Any last words to add to this?
I think you cannot earn a calling, and so and while I appreciate what Steve Smith said, is also some truth that God uses people. There are people who don't have great character who are leading movements in pioneering contexts, and there are people who have awesome character who are sowing faithfully and struggling to see fruit. So God is in control of this, not you. And it's you can't earn movement with good character.
Well said. Anything else, Tony?
Remain faithful and rejoice with what God is doing. Don't ever feel like you're less or you're not doing what God has called you to do because somebody else seems to be doing something different. But spend your time in prayer and seeking His face and just go where He's leading. Remain faithful, and then you'll see what God has in store for you.
Yeah. So we'll celebrate every bit of kingdom growth for the glory of Jesus, no matter who it is or where it is. So, okay. 5 levels of leadership.